Hello. Today we'll be talking about the Jesse Wells song "See Arkansas." But before we get started, I'd like to mention my new mask I made. I haven't done anything with it yet, haven't posted it anywhere, so I think it looks pretty nice. Um, it's a wolf instead of the fox. Is this one that, if you've seen my videos before, you'll recognize. This guy. um, so yeah, this one was the first one I made. My first attempt at it. This one's my second one. Honestly, I think the fox looks better. But I still had a lot of fun making this. And felt like it was time to use it for something. And it's got like earring like piercings as well. I just haven't put any of them in it. Like one right here and like in here and stuff. But all that to say. First of all, I'd just like to talk about the title. I really like the play on words with "See Arkansaw" because you can't tell with how you say it, but the title of the song is spelled differently, so Arkansaw, instead of being spelled with an S at the end, is spelled with a W at the end, so it's "See Arkansaw." I just really like that play on words. And so my first point with this song is it kind of talks about the sort of the juxtaposition with the pride that, there is with the place you live. And especially Arkansas has a very strong sense of identity. I feel like a lot of Americans and the individual states do have very strong senses of identity, so this isn't particularly unique to Arkansas, but they do still have that strong sense of, being from Arkansas. And so while that's a huge positive, there are lots of downsides to living in Arkansas, and just generally statistically speaking, it's not always the best place to live. So some statistics in that, and also apologies if I am incorrect on anything in this. This was the hardest song to do research for. I don't know why, but just so much information that I wanted is either unavailable to me or just seems to simply not exist. So it was very difficult to find information for this. This was the longest time I took to write something for this series. Most of these obviously I've had breaks and all that in between, but most of them take about 2-3 days to write once I actually get to them. But this one, I procrastinated so much and struggled so much with research that it took well over a week to do. And so I apologize if any of this information is incongruent with what you know. I am fairly confident in like a bunch of it. I wouldn't be saying it if I wasn't confident in it. But having said that, again, if you have any different ideas, please let me know and kind of go with which one you think is more accurate, especially because I've never been to Arkansas. This is only from, other people's accounts and whatever statistics I could find. So anyway, they rank 44th in quality of life, and this is out of the 50 states. 47th in educational attainment, so like that doesn't necessarily mean that their education is poor. It means that just not a lot of people are like graduating post-secondary or even secondary education. And then 48th in healthcare, which kind of goes with the fact that it is an area that has high levels of poverty, and so of course healthcare is expensive in America, and if you can't afford healthcare, then you're not going to get it. And then I've also seen a lot of stuff because of taxes and all that their general healthcare system in Arkansas is very outdated. And then 49th in crime, and the mean household income is 29.3% lower than the national average. With that crime, most of it is nonviolent, so it's like petty theft, drug offenses, all that sort of thing, but there is still high levels of violent crime. But good old Alaska tends to outweigh them in violent crime quite a bit. So yeah, and generally there's just an old adage, and once again, I could not find very strong numbers on this, so kind of take this with a grain of salt, but a lot of people talk about the fact that there's not a lot of immigration to Arkansas from the United States, like other states coming in and abroad. And so it's generally that the only people that live in Arkansas are people that are born there, and then you don't leave. Because most people cannot afford to leave. And generally there's also a joke that if you do leave, you tend to come back. And I mean, with our Jesse Wells, that's kind of been true. He lived in Nashville for a little bit and generally travels all over the place, but always comes back home at the end of the day. which I think kind of lends itself to the strong sense of identity that I kind of mentioned earlier, and the pride that people do still feel about Arkansas being their home state. And so, it kind of mentions this sort of idea with the like chorus in this. I passed over the Ozarks and onto the Wichitas. I skipped from poverty to poverty, fenced in Arkansas. Because it's like, the mountains that surround Arkansas are kind of a physical metaphor for being sort of trapped in this place. And another part of the song is that the state is largely undeveloped, but has been more developed in the last little bit. Larger cities, more industrialized farming, all that sort of thing has become more common. Whether you want to interpret that as a positive or a negative is up to you. In the song, it's framed as more of a negative thing, because Arkansas is known for its vast mountains and wilderness, and it still very much so is. But if you lived there, you could probably tell the difference between the forestry now to the forestry, 25, 30 years ago. And some info about the landscape is that still 56% of the state is forest, which is extremely high when compared to other states. Even states that are known to be like wilderness and all that, they're still largely agricultural. You can just look at, a satellite view on Google Maps and it'll tell you that most of these places are largely agricultural. So 56% being forest is huge. That's huge. And 45% of the people live rurally. I hate that word. I say it wrong all the time. Rurally. Got it. Which again is a very high number. And while more of the state is slowly being eaten up by land developers, it still has those very high numbers. And there's a very big pushback in Arkansas and outside of Arkansas and different Appalachia groups and all that sort of thing for Arkansas to be kept very forested. While there's only there's 5,500 acres of nationally protected forest, and then all the other protected land is done privately through conservation trusts, such as the Ozark Land Trust, and that protects 4,300 acres of land. So there is quite a bit of land that is protected in Arkansas, but hopefully in the future we will see more of that, especially in the mountainous regions. Like the Ozark Land Trust is mostly, the Ozarks, so it protects those forests as well as those mountains. And it kind of talks about in this song as well of the subdivisions and how they're owned by BlackRock and all that sort of thing, and Ozark itself, like the town Ozark, not the mountains, from which Jesse Wells is from, are subdivisions of counties where whole towns are owned by singular companies. I'm not 100% sure if Ozark itself is one of those places that is owned by a company, but there are several subdivisions in that area that are. Once again, this stuff is so hard to research. This is where I found the most difficulty. Like, a lot of those statistics I was giving previously weren't as hard, but this land stuff, oh my god, it was such a nightmare trying to find out. And at the end of the day, I didn't, basically. Especially these, I was trying to specifically look up stuff about BlackRock, as it's mentioned in the song. But this is just not publicly available information about how much land these individual companies own, especially one like BlackRock. BlackRock's whole business is that they own businesses. So BlackRock does not own a lot of land itself. It owns companies that own land. So I don't know how much land, BlackRock owns through these companies in Arkansas, or really anywhere, because one, this is information that they just don't give out, and then two, it's kind of complicated to calculate because it wouldn't be how much land is under the BlackRock name, it's how many companies are under the BlackRock name that own land. I hope I'm explaining this well. So I don't know, but having said that, they own a lot. And I also think in this song you could take it as a play on words. These are the specific lines. One second, let me move this here out of the way. So it said, I watched the concrete creep, subdivided shoutin' on a black rock mountain, saying this is how it feels to be free. So while I take that as more meaning the company BlackRock owning these subdivisions, could also be interpreted as the literal city BlackRock, but I mean, like, it makes much more sense the first way. Same with, there's also Little Rock that's in Arkansas. There's a lot of rock cities, if you look it up. But I think, means the company, I'm going to say. And so many of these different companies own stock in other companies that are land developers and are making, it's all so fucking confusing. Like I said, this was so fucking hard to research. It, like, actually hurts my head. But a lot of this, how companies are the ones owning a lot of land and owning a lot of family homes and all that, means that it is more difficult for people that live there to buy property. These, like, property value is far lower in Arkansas than most other states in America because there's not much demand to live there. So once again, property value is much lower. Same with property tax is fairly low. So you would think that would mean that there'd be more opportunity for people to own homes, but the high poverty rates mean that immediately most people do not have the funds for a down deposit, even on a cheaper home than what, you and I may see. But also because so many of these large companies are the ones getting these mortgages or owning these lands, it kind of locks out a great deal of families and, individuals that could be first-time homeowners. It's generally just another, like, cap for the wealth of the working class that has available to them. And it is, while it is very common in all states in America, it is generally a large problem in Arkansas as well, due to the fact that they simply do not have those down deposits as it is. And the bank is far more likely to give a mortgage or other land leases to people that, are in large companies that are 100% going to pay that lease than to someone who might not be able to or might flake on them. All right, and kind of not addressed the same way in this song, especially this song is almost 2 years old. Or is it 2 years old by now? I'm not sure, actually. Let me look. I think it might be 2 years old by now. When I wrote it, it was almost 2 years old. Yeah, by now it will be June 18th, and it is the 23rd. So it is, it's 2 years old now. So at the time 2 years ago, there was less talk about generative AI. Like, it was still a thing that was up and coming at the time, but way less people were talking about it than they are now. And generative AI generally does affect rural states such as Arkansas, because that is where a lot of these data centers are being placed. And there's lots of great foundations and charities and just general activism groups that are talking about protecting Appalachia from these data centers, and that extends to Arkansas and the Ozarks. And so that threatens a lot of the ecology when it comes to the water, and the air quality and the sound pollution that is created by these data centers. So keep your eye out for stuff about that. Like I said, at the time that this song was created, that was less of a concern. So I don't think this one was written with any of that in mind, but I kind of just wanted to add that in there in relation to threats to the ecology of the region. And then he talks about the nuclear plant, so I tried to do some research on that. And so it is the Arkansas Nuclear 1, which is owned by Entergy Arkansas, which was largely state-funded, as he mentions in the song, and it does provide energy to large swaths of Arkansas. However, I was trying to research about that energy being sold to other states. He mentions the fact that it's fired in a wire across state lines and the state slurped up the fee. That makes sound like that Arkansas is not benefiting fully from the Nuclear 1 energy plant. And so I was trying to find information about this. It was so hard to find. And so from what I can gather, they're not quite selling it to other states, but the grid it is on is connected to grids in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. So take that wherever you want. I'm not quite sure, but like it's information that is heavily censored. And so while I couldn't find any information that actually says that the energy is being sent to other states or is being sold in any way, the grids are connected to grids in other nearby states. So like whatever you want to take from that is your decision. And it is largely a thing that is kind of a locally known thing is the idea that I'm getting from it, is that people that live there know that the energy isn't going to them, or like, you know, have that inkling, but people on the outside, such as me, can't find that information readily available. At least that's my theory, but again, make up your own conclusion. And I was looking for a lot of this, just generally for curiosity's sake, looking on like the Google Maps satellite footage to like just get acquainted with the region and all that. And it is so clear. Sorry about my dog. It is so clear that there's great impacts to the water quality because of the nuclear plant. They claim there's not, but you can literally see on like, just trust me on this, go on Google Maps if you want to see, there's a huge visual difference in the water quality around the energy plant and all downstream from it than before the plant. Like, it's a normal looking river hits the energy plant, the nuclear power plant there, brown, and it's brown all the way to the Mississippi. So I don't know if I believe you when you say that it does not impact water quality, especially because one of the factors of nuclear energy is that they have to constantly be cooled with water, with fresh water. And while nuclear energy is largely like cleaner than a lot of other sources of energy for its fossil fuel output, I should say carbon emission output, not its fossil fuel intake. You understand what I'm trying to say. It is such a vast difference in the color of the water, and I can't simply not have any belief that it affects the water quality when looking at that. It is such a vast, obvious difference that it's just so clear to me that it's affecting the water quality. Whether that is causing large, fish die-offs, or whether that's causing humans to get like things like cancer and all that, that's harder to say. I can't say that, but you can see the damage that it has caused to the color of the river. So, and talking about the kind of the data centers again, is that this water quality might be further affected because Google has invested $4 billion to build a new cloud and AI data center in West Memphis. Yay! Which would also be powered by Entergy, which is a company that owns the Nuclear One power plant. So, yay! Yay! I love not being able to drink water. I mean, at least we fucking need energy to power our lights. And, like, cloud data is pretty important. But, like, generative AI, oh, God. We're all gonna die. And, this song also talks about the hypocrisy of Christians, a long-running theme throughout his music. The line is, one second, let me move that, there we go, is, I read the scripture on the billboard, prophesying my damnation, reaching for his life, preacher's on his third wife, out in Branson on a big vacation. And the other one is, I saw a law officer shrug his whole body, resigned to an American God, said if they wanted to, they'd help themselves, and then he put away his Bible and he got out a gun. And once again, another line is, if God lives up in the Rockies, if that's where the big man meddles, then a lesser being of a lower degree must have come down here and settled. I met revelators and archimandrites, the big and the belittled. I reckon all in time, deep in my mind, we're gonna meet somewhere in the middle. Love those lines so much. I love those lines. And so, the first one talks about the hypocrisy of preachers and how it vastly matters what congregation you're talking about. Some preachers make next to nothing in Arkansas, while others are paid $100,000 salaries and go on fancy vacations in Branson, of which there is a large casino and luxury hotels and resorts that give large discounts to Christian groups. Which is, of course, every business has a right to do certain things like that, but it does speak of a level of hypocrisy when Christianity preaches, a level of equality, and there is supposed to be no financial motive to being religious or being a preacher. That is just in and of itself, it's an oxymoron. And like I said, Branson is a specific location that advertises its vacations to not just preachers, but also just general Christian groups to vacation in, and they'll get large discounts for doing so, up to 50% off quality stays in many resorts in the mountains or on lakefronts, while the average person, fuck you. So, that kind of goes against, I'm not religious, so correct me if I'm wrong, but Jesus did not want financial gain to be an incentive to preach his word. He simply did not. And so, the Christians are supposed to be sympathetic to the needy, but they disregard this when it is not convenient to care about those needy. I think that the line about the Rockies versus the Ozarks is a clever visual metaphor for the different life expectations of the people who live in these places. Colorado has a median household income of that's $20,000 higher than the national average and is ranked the 11th best in quality of life when compared to Arkansas. If you remember the other statistics, it was far, far lower. And so the grandiose display and the fame of the Rockies kind of overshadows the more subtle beauty of the Ozarks. And, just as the same as the rich and powerful skew the perception of the poor. And I do think that he finishes off the song with a more optimistic view that these opposing viewpoints will unite those who think themselves righteous, and those they are meant to foster will put aside those differences and aid each other in the end, which is a very, very, very nice thought, and I'd like to believe that as well. Whether that is realistic is up to you, but it's a nice thought, And so the last point I will have is entirely based off of the line, and there ain't hardly a place that meth ain't planted a dead white kiss. You can smell it in the air, you can see it in the chair. It's a pretty damn hard to miss. And then the same line about the law officer. I think it's a huge problem, meth and drug use in general, just in the world. But especially in the southern states, it's real bad. While drug-related statistics are typically unreliable, as the vast majority of drug use is not reported, even overdose death statistics are not perfect, as many homeless people are attributed to the elements or conditions caused by drug use, such as pneumonia is a very, very common cause of death amongst drug users, because there are certain drugs that make you more susceptible to pneumonia. And so someone can die of pneumonia, and that's just what's written down, but in reality, it was caused from their drug use. However, the drug crisis is still very apparent everywhere you go, especially in lower income places. So many are dependent on illicit substances to cope with their reality. Veterans are also more likely to be drug dependent due to post-traumatic stress disorder and chronic pain. Arkansas has a slightly higher percentage of military veterans than the national average, just slightly, it's not very high. However, its veteran population is on average much younger. And so most of these states that have veterans on all that, they're veterans from, Vietnam. And generally their age is higher. Whereas Arkansas, a lot of them is from Iraq and Afghanistan. And while they obviously still do have those ones from Vietnam and the handful of World War II vets that are still alive, the average is much younger. And so we see a lot more people from Iraq and from Afghanistan that, in my opinion, that showcases the effects of the poverty and also to the state's state of mind, which is Arkansas is a very militaristic state. America in general is a very militaristic country. They have a culture of military service that's much higher than a lot of other places, but especially southern states. They like them, they're military. And some of that comes down to simply a level of respect and culture, and some of that comes down to the fact that there are not many opportunities available to them because of poverty-related issues. That means that the military is a more appealing prospect because it enables you to do something with your life. And unfortunately, that's just something that's not offered a lot unless you go into the military. Sorry, just looking at what I have here still. And so the other thing with this as well is that the generation of vets that, makes a lot of the veterans in Arkansas, it was during a time where a lot of them were prescribed opiates, and Oxycontin especially, that would have led to a greater opioid crisis in the region than perhaps comparatively to other states, especially like northern states and stuff like that have less of a militaristic mindset. And the sympathy for drug users is practically non-existent everywhere you go, but I feel like especially in traditionally Republican areas, the government has long treated drug addicts as criminals and unwanted instead of lending a hand to them. They put away their moral compass to punish the most downtrodden, no matter the ethical implications. The idea that they belong in a prison rather than getting mental health is just simply not accurate and leads to further damage, not real change that you want. Alright, so that was I think that pretty well covers it for this song. I didn't expect to talk for this long. I've been yappy lately. But I hope you all have a great day, and I hope I didn't miss anything. Bye-bye.